A few weeks ago, in the Stump the Rector formation session that we had at 9:15, one of you asked a crucial question. How do we reach the growing number of people who identify as spiritual but not religious? It is a great question, one that has stumped the larger church for a long time, and one that we'll continue to ask until we start to make some headway. But I think as we address this question, we need to first be able to identify why it's happening. Why spiritual but not religious? The answer, at least in part, lies in our gospel reading this morning. Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance, say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. Let's take a look at this passage for a moment. Now, first, we need to all be on the same page. The scribes were religious leaders. They were learned teachers, authoritative. And the Gospel of Mark in particular portrays them as high officials, advisors to the chief priests, and teachers of the law. So they were immersed day in and day out in scripture and biblical law and governance, not just people with the ability to read and write and who kept records. That's important to know. Now, Jesus talks about the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, and that can be confusing. I'm wearing a robe right now. So are the people serving with me at the altar. But it's not the robes that are the problem. And in some ways, it's not even the length. Everyone wore robes back then. Everyone also walked around in the dirt and the dust and the mud. It was important then, if you were poor or even middle class, to have shorter robes so that they didn't trail in the ground and get dirty and tattered and constantly need to be replaced. That's an expense you just wouldn't have. So if you walk around in long robes, you're flaunting your wealth and your status. It's not about the robes. It's about what they mean and how obvious that message is to anyone who looks at them. Well, today, we aren't talking about scribes. We're talking about bishops, priests, deacons, church and religious leaders, lay and ordained. Robes might not be the problem today, but there's so much else that can be put in their place. Jesus is talking about all of the ways that these scribes put on a show, try to make themselves look good, strive for honor and power rather than humility and grace. Interactive part. How many of you can picture one religious leader who you have come across or have heard about who fits that bill, who's like one of those scribes? Show of hands. Really, show if you can think of someone. How many of you can picture more than just one? There is our problem. No wonder so many people are spiritual, not religious. The religious leaders of our world are letting us down. A close friend said to me recently, "I don't even like the word Christian anymore. I don't like to call myself that. Because to so many people, it means being close-minded, judgmental, holier than thou, and I don't want to be associated with that." And I can't say my friend is entirely wrong. There are so many people who have been deeply hurt by Christians telling them that they are not welcome because of who they love, or who feel lesser than because of where they come from, or how much money is in their bank accounts. And that's not to mention those who have been rejected because they aren't Republican, or, in other cases, because they aren't Democrat. The word Christian has been hijacked. The image of the church has been commandeered by those who, in many ways, don't reflect the values of Christ. This does not happen everywhere. That's the good news. In fact, I believe that the majority of our religious leaders are not acting like these scribes. Remember, Jesus doesn't say, "Beware of all scribes." He says, "Beware of the scribes who." But this is a big, prominent passage, and it's that way for a reason. Because even the best of us can fall victim to ourselves and our desires. And the more leadership you have, the more influence you hold over the people around you. Every so often, I check myself with this scripture. I've never had enough money to flaunt that, like the scribes. But that's not all that Jesus talks about, is it? I distinctly remember, years ago, working at a summer camp for inner city at-risk kids. And it was pickup time at the end of the day. Everyone was together, staff and children alike, and I was exhausted. I got out my Bible and my prayer beads, and I sat down with the Bible in my lap and the prayer beads in my hand, held visibly. And I tilted my head up and I closed my eyes and I started to pray. And I let my mouth move a little bit so people could see what I was doing. But the thing is, I wasn't really praying. I addressed God. I made some mentions of something. But really, what I was doing was using prayer, my personal piety, as an excuse to not engage with the kids for a few minutes. And to look really good while I was doing it. I don't think when I started out that I fully realized that that's what I was doing. But as I was sitting there, all of a sudden, this scripture popped into my head. Beware the scribes who, for the sake of appearance, say long prayers. Well, I ended my prayer really quick then, and I found some kids who needed attention, and I have not forgotten that moment since. And still, I remind myself today, Ashley, this is not for show. This is real. You need to be present, and you need to mean it. Because here's the thing, I am your priest. For better or worse, Bob, Fred, and I are who you get. Sometimes that may be worse than better, but we'll be forgiving. And as your priest, you are looking to me, or at least I hope you are, to give you spiritual guidance, religious direction, to model for you what it looks like to be a Christian. And if I'm not doing that to the best of my ability, then how can I expect you to do it for each other and for others? And as for you, believers and followers of Christ, as people who are a part of a church and who believe in its grace and its love, you are religious leaders yourselves. You represent the church to the world. You go out each week to love and serve the Lord. So you need to know how to not be like these scribes. Otherwise, when you look at this poor widow who we heard about this morning, who gave those 2 copper coins, all that she had, then you'll only hear the most common reading, that this woman is placed on a pedestal as the prime example of Christian faith and stewardship. You won't question why an entire community would watch this woman give all that she has to live on, to presumably care for children with, when in reality, she should be the recipient of those coins and more. You won't ask why she does this. Question how closely the scribes are keeping an eye on her, how scrutinized she feels, whether she believes she even has a choice. These are the questions that we should ask. The questions that our spiritual but not religious friends are asking. Do I want to be a Christian when to be one means demanding that those most in need are not receiving but are giving? No, I don't want to be that kind of Christian. But I also know that regularly attending church does not automatically mean that I am. Together, we need to take back Christianity, to remind the entire world that to be a part of the church doesn't mean being forced to give up all that you have to live on, or changing yourself to fit a mold, or blindly following the authority of those who preach. Being part of the church means loving God, loving each other with no conditions. It means ministering to the sick, the friendless, and the needy. And it means, above all, that you do not have to do those things alone, because you are a part of a community that wants to do it with you. And if you start to suspect that your religious leaders are acting more like those scribes than Christ embodied, you can call them out. Hold them accountable. Demand more. And I include myself in that them. So go out into the world. Love and serve. Be the church. Not the church of the scribes. Be the church of Christ.